Hello, and welcome to another episode of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist. I am ill, probably heard a bit in my congestion, just a late summer cold, late spring cold, early summer cold, whatever it is. I'm on the decongestants and doing a solo episode here, trying to protect my voice before I have to do real therapy with people virtually so as not to spread any diseases. I have an episode today that has sort of been like percolating. It is, I don't want to say it's good news. It's affirming news that while the world may be on fire, there are good people out here doing good work, and it is important to highlight that as much as I spend time highlighting the stupidity of this current authoritarian regime. So maybe some good news, question mark, some positive talking points anyway that I'm excited to jump into. I want to cover briefly, again, trying to protect my voice, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists Gender-Affirming Care recommendations. They put out some guidelines for working with transgender, non-binary, and gender-expansive clients. It's a really good document, actually, which is why I wanted to highlight it. I am a clinical member of the AAMFT, again, American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, and I'm also a clinical member of the Wisconsin Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. As licensed professionals, we have all sorts of groups that we can be a part of. And it's nice when a group that you're a part of puts out something that is well done and that is ethically aligned. Again, like there's a certain level of screaming into the void that I think can happen on the internet. And it's really grounding to have community and relationships with folks who are ethically aligned with you. So this document from AAMFT comes out sort of in response to the attack on gender-affirming care. Last October, so this would have been pre-2024 election, they released a document that sort of solidified their stance on it. And this is just, I think, expounding on some of those talking points and coming with the receipts, really. Again, it's a well-done document. It's well-cited, highlights a lot of current research. The other thing that it does really well that I'm happy about is it sort of takes the stance of nothing about us without us. And so one of the things that the current authoritarian regime is doing is it has non-experts in charge of things, and it is not having marginalized communities have their own voice. It is having Trump sign an executive order that's written by the Heritage Foundation, or worse yet, Stephen Miller, or it is having RFK stand in front of a podium and make up statistics, Pam Bondi, or whomever it might be, whatever white person is in the administration talking. And what we know from fighting for civil rights is we want to center the voices of people who are affected by this thing. So nothing about us without us. Was sort of a rallying cry in the 90s around fighting for, advocating for disability rights, which again, like growing up in the 90s, like there were wheelchair accessible places, but that was a recent change. Like this is not that long ago, and some of what the current administration is trying to dismantle is that, right? Like the attack on DEI, they dropped the A, but that's always been included, which is accessibility. The original acronym was IDEA: inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And so again, like you look at Nazi Germany, one of the first things they did was go after gender non-conforming folks, and then they went after folks with disabilities. So it's deeply alarming stuff. But again, really good document from the AAMFT saying we're going to keep fighting and advocating. We're going to keep using science and evidence-based practices as our backbone for this. We're not interested in being pulled into the political sphere. This is all settled science. We're not interested in rehashing it. So the AAMFT partnered with the Queer and Trans Advocacy Network, which is also a professional group that I'm a part of. That's just part of through, spending some of my membership money or paying additional membership money so that they can go and do things like lobbying because it's needed. So lots of queer and trans folks, non-binary, gender expansive folks were involved in the writing of this. Majority of the people who wrote this document would fall under that heading. So I'm just going to start by highlighting that because I think that's really good and important. And again, I'm summarizing what is a 60-some page document that they're admitting upfront that hey, this is too short. We cannot summarize all of the decades worth of work that has gone into researching these topics in these short pages, but allow us to try. And then I'm coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to summarize even more for the sake of a podcast. But I will also link to the document. It is free and accessible to folks. I do think you have to go in and check out on the AAMFT website. I would guess that's so they can track how many people are downloading it. But yeah, so let's jump in. The main takeaway is that gender affirming care is ethical care. Therapists are ethically bound to provide gender affirming care. This is not special treatment. It's about respecting human dignity and autonomy. AAMFT makes it very clear affirming someone's gender identity is not an option. It is the baseline for competent practice. And again, I think this is really important because if you sort of look at the political talking points and this concept of the Overton window, which is how political conversation can get shifted left or right, we have lurched far, 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 far right in our conversations where, should, Roe v. Wade being overturned is a really good example. This was supposedly as perjury proof, apparently, of Supreme Court justices being certified. And they said this was settled law, again, going back to the 1970s. And yet here we are undoing that. So the Overton window has definitely shifted right. I like that this document takes a hard stance and says, we are not interested in debating this. This is settled baseline for competent care. Anyone who is practicing under our banner is ethically bound to practice in this manner, which is to say, it is baseline competent care to provide affirming gender care. Affirming your client's gender is not optional. The next thing that it gets into is gender identity is not a disorder. The guidelines laid out in this document reject pathologizing trans and gender diverse people. Being trans is not a mental illness. The distress that is talked about with something in gender dysphoria, the distress comes from social oppression, not from a person's gender identity itself. When we are talking about working with somebody with gender affirming care, we're working through the social construction of gender norms. We're working through the bureaucracy and loopholes that marginalized communities have to go through to get care that would help their perceived external gender match with their internal gender. I don't love my language there, but what they're showing is going to match with what they feel, and that's allowable, right? And that we can support them in that process. We're not trying to treat that they're trans. We're not trying to say that being trans is something that needs to be treated. We're saying this is a difficult thing that you're going through, whether you're transitioning or not. Just having a non-conforming gender and expansive gender, being non-binary, is something that is difficult given the social norms surrounding it and the oppression that comes from social structures. All of this is based on decades of research. These are not new best practices. These are things that that AAMFT is publishing again, saying, hey, this has been our standard for a long time and will continue to be our standard despite what political pressures might exist, despite what cronies might trot out and try and apply pressure. Again, licensed marriage and family therapists should be practicing this way. This is the ethical standard of our profession based on decades of research, not whatever came out of the UK that, a DeSantis administration member did, not whatever, is going to come out of the Trump administration as they dismantle well-done research and decades worth of research to drum up political talking points. Trump himself has said in interviews that he likes to trot out the trans issue, quote unquote, the trans issue, whenever there's an election. He's not interested in doing much policy-wise. He is interested in just using it as a talking point. Although the military ban was just upheld by the Supreme Court for now, it is working its way through appeals, banning trans members from military care based on the idea that simply being trans means that they cannot be honorable in the way that the military requires. Whatever that means, again, it's just bigotry, suggesting that being trans itself is some sort of problem that cannot be overcome. Again, gender identity is not a disorder. Evidence, decades worth of evidence backing that up. AAMFT goes on to say that therapists must set aside personal, cultural, or religious bias to provide care that supports well-being, as defined by what the clients are doing, right? So, ethical practice, this is on page 12 here. Ethical practice with trans, non-binary, gender expansive clients requires MFTs to evaluate, that's MFTs, it's marriage family therapists, to evaluate their own competence, bias, and willingness to practice in an affirming manner. Our role as a provider is not to determine if clients are trans enough, but rather to explore the transition process with them and ensure that they can make informed decisions. Unlike cisgender methods that weaponize questions to revert individuals to cisgender identities, affirming practices encourage inquiries aimed at informing the client and accepting their conclusions. This is all really good stuff, like this stuff that I am ethically aligned with. This is stuff that when you're practicing from this lens, it's really great to have, again, an overarching governing ethics body come out and say this stuff and put it in paper. Clinicians must stay informed about trans, non-binary, and gender expansive individuals' unique challenges and proactively advocate for their rights and well-being. This awareness must translate into deliberate actions that challenge and dismantle systems of oppression. Again, this is not a stand on the sidelines. This is not something that we can hem and haw about. This is something that ethically practicing therapists must, again, set aside personal, cultural, or religious bias to provide care that supports clients' well-being. I'm just going to go ahead and call out all Christian therapists then. I'm oversimplifying, but based on my experience when I was a Christian, when I was practicing, Christian counselors are not abiding by ethical standards. They are saying that their Lord matters more than their ethical standards. If you encounter something like this, you can make a complaint to whatever licensing board they're practicing under, because that is not ethical practice. And again, this is something that, this is where accountability matters. This is what religious leaders have been fighting against. I believe it's in California right now, or no, Washington State. They just passed a law saying that religious leaders, including Catholic priests, are mandated reporters. The Catholic Church then promptly responded by saying, if Catholic priests break confidentiality, quote unquote confidentiality of confession, they will be excommunicated. So basically saying, we're going to need you to go ahead and ignore that law and keep protecting predators instead of protecting victims, because that's been the church's stance for millennia. How fun. But anyway, again, if you are somebody who has been discriminated against because of your gender identity, because of a therapist's perceived religious bias, then we can go ahead and report that person, and we should. You can talk to a better therapist about how that process works, and they'll help you. The guidelines that AAMFT posted emphasize how race, disability, class, and other identities intersect with gender, especially in how systems harm trans people. Again, a basic sort of understanding of intersectionality is important here. It's not the breadth of the podcast I'm hoping to get into. Basically, that trans people aren't required to educate you on these topics. You need to be educated on these topics. These are not hard concepts. The idea that socioeconomic status, race, class, ability, status, gender, sex, all these things intersect, and there's an interplay between those things. I have a lot of privilege because I am white and I am male. I didn't have privilege based on my socioeconomic status because I grew up very poor. So, that looks different than someone else. You could look at it and say, well, Jeremy, did you go to private school? Like I did go to private school. I went to shitty religious schools that were expensive. And the only way that I could go to those were because my parents were teachers there. And so I did go to private school and I'm privileged in the education I got. And the way I was socialized was I was marginalized because I was the poor kid at all of my schools. So again, like being able as a therapist to I use my own example there to highlight like there's complexity in these things. And that's for a cisgendered white dude. The complexity increases exponentially for marginalized communities who have more than one marginalized status, whether that's, again, race, gender, sex, religion, disability, class, all these things are intersections. And trans people, gender nonconforming, gender expansive, non-binary folks are some of the most marginalized across those different intersections, especially when we start talking about race and looking at something like trans men and the specific and unique intersectionalities that they're going to be dealing with. It's a whole thing. And so again, it's not our client's job and it's not our client's responsibility to educate us on that. It's our responsibility as providers to be educated on these topics so that we can hold space for clients in a way that they need. Gender affirming care, again, going back to the guidelines laid out here, gender affirming care has to be anti-racist, anti-ableist, and trauma informed to be legitimate. Again, and why am I saying this? Again, if you're one of a therapist who listens to the podcast regularly, you've heard a lot of these talking points. I've had people on to talk about these things specifically. If you know me personally, you're here with me, but also there are therapists out there who are still trying to debate, like, oh, I don't know, maybe therapists should be politically neutral. Like, no, therapists are politically active. Trying to be neutral is taking a stance, which is saying, I am not going to use my privilege to advocate for marginalized communities. Therapy is political. It has to be. It is decidedly affected by the political sphere in which we are operating, and how clients can get to us, how clients can work with us is affected by politics. Therefore, therapy is political. People who are on the sidelines are taking a stance, which is saying they're not being aware of these systems of oppression and they're not interested in fighting against them. That's their stance. The AAMFT calls out therapists who are doing that, which is good. Too many family therapists still lack the training or courage to support gender diverse clients. Neutrality is a cop-out. When one side is being dehumanized, therapists must actively resist transphobia. Hell yeah. Neutrality is a cop-out. I have no time or tolerance for that. I'm glad that the professional group that I'm a part of is calling that out. I see that too often online from therapists who have big followings online, from therapists who are doing a lot of things. It is a problem. And then there's a lot of best practices laid out. So again, the document spends most of its time sort of looking at different intersections of identity that clients could show up with, whether that is, sorry, I'm scrolling up back to the, where is it? It talks about religious, it talks about monogamous versus non-monogamous, couples and relationships, family dynamics, sex and intimacy, neurocomplexity, rural healthcare, cis therapists working with trans, non-binary, and gender expansive clients, older adults, younger adults, children, teens and their families. It just looks at a lot of different of these sort of life stage, developmental stages that clients could be showing up in, and then also different considerations that providers should be taking into care. Again, the document is not designed to be expansive in what it is covering. It is sort of laying out, it is the best practice to be informed on these things. And so if this is a topic that you are ill-informed on or under-informed on, you should not be practicing with those clients. Some that I want to highlight just real quick is name and pronoun use is not optional or a courtesy. It is foundational of ethical practice. We are not gatekeepers of gender-affirming medical care. Our job as therapists is to support, not to police someone's identity. Again, this is swimming upstream for how the system is designed. Again, people who are looking for medical transition have a lot of hoops to jump through. One of them is generally 6 months of therapy. That can vary from state to state. And this document is, again, saying like, it is not our job to police that. It is our job to support clients as they're going through that process. Informed consent, autonomy, and collaboration are key themes throughout this document, which is all like thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Making sure our clients are well informed on the process, supporting our clients' autonomy and making their own decisions in this process, and collaborating with our clients. We are not coming in as experts on our clients' identities. We are coming in as people who are trained in how to navigate the process and support our clients through that process. Not, again, top-down expert and non-expert, but rather collaborative in people walking that path together in a supportive nature. So it's really lovely. Again, I like how the document takes a strong stance, calling out the both sides rhetoric. This is the paradox of intolerance, that to be a tolerant society, we cannot tolerate intolerance. When erasure is the goal, when taking away the rights and stripping rights away from marginalized communities is what is happening, when there's dehumanization going on, you need to speak up. You need to use that privilege. Therapists are privileged, right? Like, we have our little office spaces. We are, from societal's view, the expert. People come to us for professional help. So yeah, if you're not using that privilege to dismantle oppressive systems, you are supporting those oppressive systems. And then the document, highlights how advocacy is important, that therapists not only need to be informed, but taking direct action. These guidelines are a form of resistance and professional backbone in a dangerous moment. It gives therapists a thing to fall back on and highlight as they continue to provide ethical care for their clients. And I think, right, that's what needs to happen. Trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks are the targets of discrimination, erasure, bigotry, hate, and violence. To a very high degree, hate crimes under Donald Trump are up again, because of course they are. We can change that, but not immediately, and we need to offer people support and care as they're having to deal with that in their day-to-day lives. Trans, non-binary, and gender expansive folks need therapists to go where they can't. They need people who have the privilege, who are not coming from that marginalized community, to stand up and use their voices to advocate for them in this political moment, in this idea, this time where science and evidence-based practices are under attack, in which our system of care, our vehicles for delivering care are being dismantled. This document and documents like these from other groups are very important to align therapists and to give us that sort of documented backbone to the way that we're going to practice from an ethical perspective. And your therapist needs therapy. The podcast is designed to sort of be highlighting how therapists take care of their mental health. This document is part of that, right? Like, this is an uplifting document for providers to fall back on and say, hey, like, this group that I support, this group that is in Washington at the state level doing advocacy, lobbying for good mental health regulations, lobbying for supporting providers, supporting clients, even when that we are swimming upstream against an authoritarian regime. These are things that, we don't all need to be in state courthouses lobbying. We can't be often. And so choosing to support organizations that are doing these things, our professional memberships, our dues that we pay, go to support things like advocacy, go to support things like fighting shitty legislation. So is an uplifting document for me as a provider. It's an uplifting document for other providers, I think, who are ethically aligned with this. It's nice to have it laid out in such stark terms that like these things are non-negotiable. These are a baseline, and therapists need to then continue to do their own work to grow in these areas and stay informed in these areas, or they shouldn't be treating these clients because they could do harm. And clients needing support and expecting clients again to educate their therapists, or expecting clients to jump through a bunch of hoops to find a therapist who can support them the way they need to be supported is already an injustice, putting more work on the marginalized community just so they can get baseline competent care is not what we want. We need therapists to do better, and documents like this are a good starting point. It's really nice, again, as somebody who works in this realm and works with clients who are from this marginalized community, to have a document like this come out. It's just like, yeah, for me, it's nothing that's new, but it's very confirming, affirming. It's normalizing that, like, yeah, this is good. There are people who are doing the fighting. There are people who are aligned. This is what people know based on decades of evidence. Whatever right-wing, crazy, authoritarian nonsense is going on, it's designed to be crazy making. It isn't going to undo decades worth of research and evidence-based practice. So, yeah, I will link to where to get the document. I think it's worth a read if you're a therapist, certainly, and if you're not a therapist, I mean, it's got some lovely takeaways. Again, really well sourced document, really well written document. So I think if you want to sort of know where therapists stand, if you're in that journey of finding a good therapist, like this is a good document to sort of have and see that therapists are aligned with it. I've always been biased towards MFTs. That's my licensure. I feel strongly that having that systemic lens is really important, not just for doing couples therapy, but obviously for doing couples therapy, but very much for understanding things like systemic injustice and systemic oppression. Having that background of a systemic lens and understanding how systems interact with each other is really important for doing this work. So if you're a therapist, please check out this document. If you're not a therapist, also worth checking out, but like good to know that there are people out there who are advocating for this and doing this work. If you happen to be just a wealthy patron and want to support me and my work, that's cool. Or like supporting these groups. Again, like one of the things with activism is we do not need to rebuild it from the ground up. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are people who are doing the work. And if you don't have the time or the knowledge to be a lobbyist or an activist, to support people who are already doing the work. So as always, y'all, thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. We'll be back next week with another new episode. Peace.